Hi everyone, today we're going to review sentence types, which kind of remind me of recipes. We're going to be specifically talking about simple, compound, complex, and compound complex sentences. And in order to do that, we kind of need to review what dependent and independent clauses are first. So in case you forgot, dependent and independent clauses go something like this. First of all, a clause by definition has to have both a subject and a predicate. The only difference between dependent and independent clauses is whether or not they can stand alone. For example, a dependent clause can't stand alone. It can't be its own complete sentence because it's a fragment type. And usually, dependent clauses are fragments because of awubis words, which are more formally called a subordinating conjunction. Awubis stands for although, after, as, when, while, until, before, because, if, and since. So awubis is kind of a dumb acronym, but these are the most common subordinating conjunctions, and if you see one of these in a group of words, that means that the awubis word has demoted it down to a dependent clause. For example, if you look over here to the left, normally the sentence, "the bus is late," is an independent clause. That's a complete sentence. I have a subject, the bus, and predicate is late. However, if I add an awubis word like because to the front of that, I am now demoting that complete sentence down to being dependent. And I have to add more to the sentence to make it complete again. Same thing applies with the second example. Normally, if I said, "you have homework," we may not like that sentence, but it is a complete one. But look what happens when I add the word since, which is the awubis word. "Since you have homework." You feel that awkward pause? That's because the sentence isn't complete anymore. It's a dependent clause now. So I have to keep going. And again, an independent clause can stand alone because it's complete. By the way, people like to mix up clauses and phrases. A clause has a subject and a predicate, but a phrase has only one or the other. It's the other type of fragment. That will be important in a few minutes. So here are 4 recipes for different sentence types. Look at us being all cross-curricular and using math. These are kind of thought of as formulas or maybe recipes. For example, simple sentences are the easiest ones. It's just one independent clause, like "the bus was late." But watch out, because if a simple sentence has a phrase in it, it's still simple. In 1969, man went to the moon. That's an introductory phrase, and that doesn't change what sentence type this is. The ballerina, by the way, a Harvard graduate, won a Tony Award. This is just an interruption, but it's just a phrase, so it doesn't change the fact that it's a simple sentence. The second sentence type is compound, and that's when you have 2 independent clauses. Here's one example. "I tried to help you, yet," fanboy's word, "you chose not to listen." This first half is a complete sentence, and the second half is a complete sentence. I have 2 independent clauses, joined correctly by a comma and fanboy's word. So this is all good. It's a compound sentence. Just make sure, please, that you don't create a run-on with compound sentences, because compounds are where most run-ons happen. You can use a semicolon or a comma fanboys. Just be conscientious of what you're putting in the middle between those 2 independent clauses, please. Complex sentences are kind of fun, because do you see that X in complex? That reminds me of mix, like a mix and match. I've got one of each. One independent clause, one dependent clause. Look at this example. "I trust you because you keep my secrets." Now notice how I've got not just one independent, one dependent, But I know this second half is dependent because it's got an awubis word in it. Because that awubis word kind of kicked off a dependent clause. And that's how I know for sure that it's complex. Watch out though, because if you put that dependent clause first in the sentence, it does need a comma after it. After we left the game, comma, my friends and I bought ice cream. Here's my dependent clause kicked off by an awubis word. Here's my independent clause. I have one of each. It's a mix and match, so it's complex. And finally, a compound complex sentence is the long, more complicated one, and it, as the name implies, has the same ingredients as compound and complex put together. It's like a little Venn diagram. Because in compound complex, I have at least 2 independent clauses and at least 1 dependent clause as well. Although we studied, comma, our class failed the test, semicolon. We understand better now. I have 2 independent clauses, and I have 1 dependent clause that was started off by an awubis word. Just please watch out. Don't automatically call a sentence compound complex just because it looks long. You have to actually measure it out, just like recipe ingredients, and make sure that it does at least have those 2 independents and 1 dependent. Don't just guess and say, oh, it looks long, so it must be that. Okay? Which, by the way, check out my tip over here. If you're ever not sure what kind of sentence is going on, annotate it. Highlight each clause as dependent or independent. If you do that, you can easily see what recipe has been filled. Is it simple, compound, complex, compound, complex? Notice how I set the example for you, and I did all this highlighting, not to be random, but to actually show you that the highlighting helps. So let's practice that highlighting now. Take a minute and see if you can figure out what sentence type each one of these sentences is. Pause the video if you want to, before I show you the answers. Start now. Hopefully you're ready, and hopefully you took a good guess, because here are the right answers. Look at number 1. After the test, comma, we will all breathe a sigh of relief. This is still a simple sentence. It has an awubis word after, but after the test is just a phrase. We talked earlier about how phrases don't change a sentence type. But if I say, after the test ended, awubis, subject, predicate, now this is a clause, and I've got 1 of each. It's a mix and match, so it's complex. The principal gave us a party and let us eat candy. Guys, this is just a simple sentence. It happens to have a compound predicate because the same subject is doing 2 things, gave us a party, let us eat candy, but it's still a simple sentence. It would be compound if I did number 4. The principal gave us a party, comma, and she let us eat candy. 4 is different from 3 because this second half has its own subject, she. So I put a comma in Fanboy's word to correctly make a compound sentence. When you finish your homework, you can go outside and play. Here's my main independent clause. Here's a dependent one kicked off by an awubis word. Now 6 is different because I added to it. I kept going. I put a semicolon right here, added a second independent clause, and now this is compound complex. Number 7. Since she asked nicely, comma, Brenda got a cookie. Independent, dependent, started by an awubis word. 8 is different because I took out the awubis word, and therefore I had 2 independent clauses and decided to put a comma Fanboys in between to keep it from being a run-on. I genuinely hope this video was helpful. If not, feel free to watch it again, or let me know if you need help in class. Thanks for watching.